everybody, it's Gio. Welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk to you guys about the Dallas Fuel. This is a team who notoriously went through a lot of struggles in Season 1 of the Overwatch League, and I want to talk about whether we can expect them to have some vast improvements going into Season 2. Now, I don't want to dig through the skeletons in everybody's closets, and I'm pretty sure if you went down the 2018 roster, you would pretty much be able to find an issue that every member had. So I'm not going to go through all the problems, and rather talk about the potential improvements and issues that we could be seeing with the 2019 roster, and of course the new backroom staff. Now, of course, the Dallas Fuel are my team, so I'm really excited to make this video because I'm sure many of you are really excited to see what Dallas Fuel can do to turn themselves around. Of course, if you don't know, Team Envy, which is how they were known before the Overwatch League came about and the franchising, were pretty much regarded as the best Western team in all of Overwatch. They came first in Apex Season 1. They also came first in the Major League Gaming 2016 in Vegas. They came first in Overwatch Contenders 2017 Season 1 in North America. They basically have got a lot of medals under their belts, and everybody thought coming into the Overwatch League that they were going to absolutely dominate. But it wasn't quite what we were expecting, and actually Dallas Fuel ended up falling quite a bit, and for a long time no one could really tell what exactly the problem was. And I think actually if we're honest, it's not just down to one problem. But the point is, now we're going into a new season, we got a new roster. These problems, a lot of them have been addressed, and now it's time to see if Dallas can pull themselves back up. So I'm going to start by talking about the DPS, and we'll start by talking about the improvements and then potential issues. So for improvements, a really big one is both Taimu and Effect coming into this season with better attitudes. What do I mean by that? Well, Taimu and Effect both were kind of victims of mental health struggles in Season 1. Taimu was actually hospitalized for extreme stress, and Effect ended up going home to South Korea at stages in Stage 3 and Stage 4 of the Overwatch League Season 1, both for very similar reasons, as I say, crazy stress, and it was taking its toll on their performance. Now, one thing that we do know is just prior to Stage 4 last year, the Dallas Fuel did hire a sports psychologist. Now, I don't know if they still have the same guy or if they've got someone else. I would assume that they do, but nonetheless, having that there towards the end of the season will mean that they go into this next season with really good fundamentals on how to look after themselves and how to allow themselves to have a better psychological basis to be more stable, to be more healthy going into this next season. Both of these players were really at risk of performance loss as a result of tilt, and that's kind of at the minor end of the scale. When you're talking about mental health when it comes to things like this, it can get quite serious. There is, of course, the risk of relapse, but hopefully Dallas have identified that problem and they will know how to deal with it going into Season 2 and already have these things prepared and laid out so these players and the rest of the roster have all the support they need to prevent these issues from coming up in the forthcoming season. Now, speaking of Taimu, he has massively improved. There were concerns partway through Season 1 of the Overwatch League that he was getting maybe a little bit washed up, he wasn't as good, everybody knew him as this amazing aimer, this amazing sniper, and he just wasn't quite hitting the marks that he used to. Now, Taimu actually put a lot of work in last season to bring himself back up, and that is something that he did manage to achieve. So it should be that going into Season 2 of the Overwatch League, Taimu has been continuing on that practice. He's found his flow and how to work and continue staying at the top with the rest of the players who play the same role as him, and come into Season 2 of the Overwatch League completely on top form. Taimu has quite a broad hero pool, and a lot of the heroes that were played in his hero pool we did see come up a lot in Contenders Season 3, which has obviously just been and gone, and so that suggests that they could be coming up as we move into the Overwatch League, particularly heroes like McCree. We saw a lot of what we call the Super McCree composition come up in Contenders, and so if things like this do come up in the Overwatch League, then Taimu is really who Dallas are going to want playing those heroes, and it will be obviously great if he is on top form for that. Now, AKM is worth mentioning because he came into Dallas partway through Season 1, and he came in with this amazing soldier, and then it started to become a bit obvious that maybe his hero pool was a little bit limited for what they needed. But now he's actually had all this time where he can practice and adapt his hero pool, and we could see him coming into this next season a lot more prepared. We also have Zachary, who is a new pickup for the roster, and he can pretty much be molded to what Dallas Fuel needs. So we should see a lot of improvement from AKM and possibly a lot of potential come in from Zachary. Now, the issues with the DPS, the biggest one in my opinion is the fact that there is no dedicated projectile player. I was actually a really big proponent for Shadowburn being picked up by the Dallas Fuel. I thought he would have been a great fit. However, he obviously didn't get picked up. They picked up Zachary instead, and most of the heroes in the hero pools of these 4 DPS players do overlap, and they are mostly to the hit scan side of things. So what this means is either somebody is going to have to change role, which is entirely possible. We could find out that either AKM or Zachary, or maybe even both, have been training to become a projectile player, or see a rotation in roles where we get different people trying to fill at different times, which in my opinion doesn't work quite as well. We actually saw that happen a lot in Dallas Fuel's support line last year, and personally I think it's a lot better to have dedicated players who have expertise on certain heroes. Now, of course, if I remember correctly, the rule set has been changed where now you can sub in a new player after every map rather than just at half time, which means that this would be a lot more possible to have different players just fill for the role, but it also means that you will lack this sort of dedicated starting roster. It also runs a really big risk of the team not being as meta resistant as maybe some other teams, because right now the team could run a really successful GOATS comp, and that is most likely what we will see going into the Overwatch League, because that's what these teams are used to. But over time we will gradually see metas changing, as always happens. Also coming in on patch 1.32, we don't yet know how the top level competitive play is going to do that. So they could start off on GOATS really well, but we can't necessarily see what's going to come in the future, and this isn't completely future-proof, because if it comes to a meta where you want a double projectile, or even going back to dive, there are serviceable Genjis on this team, but are they going to be able to compete with an opponent who is an expert in Genji, a dedicated Genji player who, you know, this is their hero of expertise? Dallas Fuel don't really have that when it comes to the projectile heroes, so I think that is a little bit of a risk. Now, another risk is kind of going back to a point I already made, and that this sort of relies on the mental stability of Taimu and Effect, particularly Effect, because he would most likely be the dedicated Zarya player in a GOATS composition. And if we find that Dallas haven't found an effective way of helping to deal with these problems that particularly these two players have faced in the past, it could mean that they are put in a position where they do have to fill, they do have to try and compromise. Hopefully that won't be the case, of course, and I really do feel strongly that the chances are that Dallas has found a good way of dealing with these things. And if you look at these players' social media, it looks like they're both really ready to face the new season, but it is, of course, a risk. Okay, so now moving on to the tanks. Big improvement is we now have this pre-synergized main tank with the rest of the team, and this is really important, particularly for GOATS compositions, especially as OG is the shot caller of the team, or at least was last season. I don't see why that would change, and it means that the team have that anchor, that stability around which they can revolve. With the issues that happened with XQC last year, it meant that there was a big lack of stability in that main tank role. And yes, OG was brought in last year, but because they didn't start the season together, it did take time to build up. So coming into a fresh new season with that is going to be a big boom for the Dallas Fuel. They now have a very talented off-tank slash diva specialist in RCK. RCK came straight from Team Giganti in Contenders EU, and he is an exceptionally good diva. And one of the problems that Dallas did face last year was kind of lackluster diva play. And it's not that Mickey is bad at the hero, but when you compared him to his counterparts on other teams, he really didn't quite live up to what they were all doing, and RCK should be able to provide that for the Dallas Fuel. Now, a kind of surprising big improvement is the fact that there is no language barrier between the two tank players. Not that there really was last year, because obviously XQC and Mickey are both English speakers, and Coco as well, we can't forget him. But one thing that is super rare is to have a Korean player and a Western player who are in that kind of duo situation where there isn't a language barrier. OG speaks basically perfect English, and RCK is also fluent in English. So that's actually not going to be an issue, which means they can really benefit from the fact that they have this really strong Korean main tank, and they also have a really strong European who has come from a team that is known for their exquisite tank play, come together and be able to work together and not have to worry about communication. Now, we can't forget Mickey, and to be honest, he gets a lot of flack where he doesn't quite deserve it, because not only do we have a really good Brigitte in Mickey, which again, in GOATS, as the season starts, we should expect to see him pretty much on the starting roster for that particular role, but also something that Mickey has shown historically that he's exceptionally good at is every time a new hero comes out, or even a new meta starts to emerge, Mickey is very, very good at being able to figure out the core utility of a hero and how to use them the most effectively. He was pretty much known for pioneering the way that D.Va is now played, and we saw that in the Overwatch League with Brigitte as well. So even though some of his counterparts oftentimes overtake him in their skill ceiling, like the actual cap to their abilities, and Mickey can't necessarily always reach that, it means that Dallas Fuel do get a head start in being able to use these heroes really effectively, and to be honest, they have a really fantastic asset in Mickey in keeping him on the team for that. Alright, so now time to look at the issues for the tank line. The first one being there is no main tank substitution. Now, OG is a fairly well-balanced main tank. Personally, I would say now he's probably more a little bit associated with Reinhardt, especially after the GOATS meta has been so prolific. But he does have a very, very good Winston. However, if he were to get ill or something, that's going to leave a really big issue, because you don't even have Coco sitting on the bench anymore. You don't have someone who can jump in that place. I know Taimu did learn how to play Winston, but he's still not a Reinhardt player, and it is a big risk. But you also have the fact that it does give an issue with perhaps meta resistance. As I say, I would personally say now he's a bit more known for Reinhardt, because teams have been practicing a lot of Reinhardt. So let's say he's kind of out of practice with Winston, and then suddenly he wants to start playing Winston. Maybe his Winston isn't as good as it needs to be, or as good as someone on the opposing team who is a Winston specialist is playing. You also have to remember Orisa and Wrecking Ball. Now, we've seen OG use Orisa, and he is actually a very good Orisa, but Wrecking Ball, I actually don't know. It could turn out that Mickey ends up being their Wrecking Ball specialist, who knows. But the point is, I think it's quite risky to only run one main tank. I mean, it's not the only team that does it. London Spitfire, quite notorious for that, only have Gesture once Fisher left. But nonetheless, I think it is a bit of a risk. It is a good job that he's a well-balanced main tank, that he has got a lot of work coming for him to be able to maintain that amongst 4 different tank heroes now, so that he can keep going, because they don't have someone who can specialize in another one for him. Of course, the same thing as kind of last season, but Mickey can be kind of easily outclassed. Of course, we're expecting RCK to be on the starting roster for any D.Va play. But if for any reason Mickey has to be playing on those tank roles and not be in Brig Jail, he can be quite easily outclassed, and that could be something that gets exploited by other teams. Now, with RCK being new, we don't have a pre-synergized tank line on the team, which is something that is often a really big boon to other teams and can really put you in a head start position, because especially in current metas, having that pre-synergized tank line is exceptionally important. Your tanks need to know how they're revolving around one another and how they work with one another, and being already familiar with the other's playstyle is a really big head start on that. Now, RCK obviously coming from Contenders Europe, he's used to playing with LH Cloudy, who is now on the Paris Eternal. OG already been with Dallas Fuel for quite a while, so RCK is gonna take some time to get used to that playstyle. Of course, they will have already been scrimming at this point, but it's still not going to be as effective as if these two had played together for a significantly longer amount of time. Alright, moving on to the support. So the first really big improvement that I am looking at is the fact that we now have dedicated roles. I mentioned it earlier, but something that we did see last season quite a bit was the 3 support players kind of rotating through the roles. We saw pretty much each of them on both the main and flex support role, whereas now we pretty much just have these dedicated roles. We'll have Closer on the main support and Unko on the flex support. Harry Hook, he can sub in, he can actually play both these roles, so we don't need to worry too much about there not being a specific sub for one or the other. But I think it'll be really great for Dallas to have these dedicated roles in their support line. It allows them to synergize and cement their playstyle together. Dallas didn't have the most standout support line last year. Custer was pretty great, but of course he got traded for Unko, and Unko is good, but being new, he didn't have that kind of synergy, and I think this will just be a really good fresh start for Dallas with a solid support line with dedicated roles, and I think that will be really great for them, because having that support line who can work around each other and know exactly what they're doing, rather than having to sort of just be put on a different role suddenly and figure it out as they go, that's going to work really well even for the rest of the team. The other improvement is it's now a really high level skill. I kind of just mentioned it, but you know, Chips Hyan was not necessarily the best player, and Harry Hook was not the worst, but not the best. And obviously he's still on the roster, but I don't suspect that he will be on the starting roster. And so now, as I say, with Unko and Closer together, they make a really high skill support line, and I think that will be something that we notice quite strongly in the new and improved Dallas Fuel. For the support line, I only really have one big issue, and that is that there is a language barrier. Closer, of course, coming from the London Spitfire, he's only played on a team which have all Korean comms and no reason to have ever had English comms. I don't know what his English is like, so it could be that he's actually amazing at English and completely fluent. I don't know that for sure, so in which case it's probably not going to be too much of an issue. But if that is an issue, he could be relying on OGE to translate for him during the fight, and especially while he's shot calling. Like, that's quite a big ask, and it's going to definitely interrupt the flow of the shot calling and of how all these communications are going through to each player. So I think Closer will probably have to work on learning English if he doesn't already know it, and that may take some time. So that could be a concern, but I think ultimately that is a hurdle that can be jumped. It just may take a little bit of time to do so. And of course, I have to mention the support staff. So last year, it was kind of no secret that there were some issues with the head coach Kai. This isn't really a place to pass any opinions, as many people had their own individual opinions on the situation, but the point is it was a little bit of a rocky situation for Dallas. Now Kai is no longer with Dallas, he's now with the Paris Eternal, and instead they have head coach Aero with a number of assistant coaches. Now Aero has definitely worked with Zachary on the team before. None of the other members, as far as I'm aware, have worked with Aero, but he has proven himself. He does have credibility. He coached Team USA this year, and he is a very good head coach. So hopefully we'll see a lot more stability coming from the kind of core of the team, and that is the coaching role. So they'll be able to provide more stability, more help, allow the players to be the best they can be. Of course, we also have Jane, who this is kind of his first major coaching thing. He coached Team Canada this year at the World Cup, who of course came third, not fourth. The UK came fourth. Damn, I'm projecting. So he is a little bit new to it, but he also has a lot of credibility. He also has that personable side, which we do know because, you know, he's been a public figure in Overwatch for quite a while at this point. And I think we all know that Jane is the sort of person who I suspect that a player would feel comfortable talking to him about things, and that is really important because not only is a role of a coach to get good results out of players, but it's also to make them feel comfortable and put them in a position where they feel like they can improve and that they are improving both as people and as players. It's not just about the did we win this series, it's about do you feel like you improved and have I had a positive effect on that and on your life. And I think Jane is the sort of person who provide that for his players. So I think Jane and Aero alone provide a really good basis, but we also have to remember Vol'jin and Tikati, I think is how you pronounce his name, who are also on the coaching staff. Vol'jin does speak perfect English, but he is there to speak Korean. I think he will be able to communicate with the Korean players. But the fact that he speaks English, I think, will prevent an issue that we've seen in a couple of other teams before, where the Koreans have their Korean coach and the Westerners have their Western coach, and there is that kind of divide. So it should have that like nice merge. And then of course Coco, who was on the player roster last season, is now an assistant coach, and he'll be able to provide that player insight. He knows exactly what it's like to be in the situation that these players are in, and he'll be able to give that back to them, and I think that will be really useful for them as well, and especially the fact that he already has the familiarity with them as a former teammate. So personally, I think given all of these factors, I'm expecting Dallas Fuel to do a lot better in the coming season. I think kind of what happened last year was they were used to being the best in the world, and they kind of went in all guns blazing expecting things to be the same, and were sort of just hit a bit hard. And the nature and the culture of the Overwatch League provided a lot more stress and did have a negative impact on the mental health of a number of the players, and they did run into problems. And I think that Dallas will be able to go into this season having learned a lot of lessons from a number of things that happened last season, and will be so much more prepared. They will know exactly where they have to focus on both in player performance and also the background things like mental health, like providing that kind of support. And I think they'll come in and do really well. As long as OGE doesn't get sick and they don't have a main tank to replace him, I think it should be great. But let me know if you agree or disagree on any of these points and what you maybe think is going to come for the Dallas Fuel in Season 2. Maybe there's something I missed out or didn't consider. But personally, those are my thoughts. I can't wait to see how they do this season. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.